Hi, I'm Tony Bowen, and welcome to my monthly progress build of my Rock Island Cato E-8. This is actually a bonus part. I had started part 4 that was going to be on the fuel tank modification for the locomotive and DCC installation. Well, when I started looking at it, I was like, oh my goodness. By the time I got done with the fuel tank modification, and then went through pretty explicitly on how I put in the DCC decoder, the video itself was close to 50 minutes long. And I thought, nobody wants to watch that much. Or maybe you do, I don't know. But I thought it seemed a little lengthy. So I broke it down into 2 parts. So you're going to have a smaller part today, which is part 3.5, what I called it, that is just basically on how I modified the fuel tank for the E-8. Matching the prototype. Then on the normal schedule on April 11th, we'll have the regular part 4, which will get still a pretty lengthy video on the DCC decoder installation on that. So I hope you will enjoy watching this short little part 3.5 on the fuel tank modification that I did for the Rock Island E unit. This is the standard Cato fuel tank that comes on most E8s and E7s. The first thing I did was try to figure out a way I could cut off the skirting from the fuel tank. So I started cutting off the points of the skirting and then went parallel to the molded in air tanks. Once I had the skirting figured out and how to cut it off, I took one of my filing sticks and started sanding away at the fuel tank, getting rid of the rest of the skirting and the molded in inset where the engine room ladders would hang down. With the air tanks being exposed, I wasn't real crazy about the thick plastic they had to represent the piping, so I shaved that off, drilled holes, and ran brass wire to represent the piping that was once there. Having sanded the skirting and the inset where the ladder would go, that also took off all the gauges for the water fill up for the tank and also for the diesel fuel. So I was able to use some gold medal model parts that I had to use on the fuel tank. They're not exactly a perfect fit, but by the whole time the tank is painted black, I think they're going to blend in well and be a good representation of the gauges that you would normally find on a fuel tank. Okay, so there you have it, how I modified a basic Cato E8 tank, fuel tank that would come with the locomotive, that I had cut down the points of the skirts on each side and took off the tab and only cut down right to where the air tank is, and then just kind of trimmed that down. So went down about a quarter of the way, came back, cut it, and gave it kind of a flat look where I have nothing but the air tank and then the fuel tank. And then essentially where it had the rest of the skirting, kind of the molded in divot for where the ladder would go in the mid-engine door of the car body, basically sanded all of that off, just using one of the fine kind of emery board sanding sticks until it became a very smooth finish. And then I had essentially a fuel tank that left me with the air tanks exposed, kind of just a nice rounded fuel tank. I was able to use some of the gauges for the water or for the diesel fuel that came off a gold medal models detail set that I just kind of trimmed those off. Pre-drilled some holes into the fuel tank to allow the piping to go up as opposed to just kind of the bulky, thick, molded on plastic stuff that the Cato units had. Now, the one thing that may pose to be a problem is on the original one, it has these tabs that kind of snap into the molded tabs that are on the metal chassis of the Kato units. And this obviously does not have those molded tabs. So there may be a little tension that I left, a little extra of the piping that as I kind of push them together, they may hold on to the chassis real well. But the other thing is I think I'm going to use just some like double stick tape. And when I put the double stick tape in there, kind of pushed it up underneath the metal chassis, I think that's going to hold real well. One other thing that I'm going to do that I didn't talk about in the pictures, but when I drilled the holes for the piping, I let this piece of wire go all the way through and then up, kind of like a big U shape. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to trim those off and bend those back. The reason is, once that's on this metal chassis, that could definitely make some conductivity and short out the locomotive. So my plan is to cut that so that doesn't create a problem. And I have found, having two daughters, that sometimes using some nail polish, and needless to say, my daughter doesn't mind letting me borrow just a little nail polish, that once I cut these, just kind of coating them with some nail polish so it makes kind of a insulated part of the wire on it so that it does not conduct any kind of electricity or cause any kind of shorting. So just another tip that I'll do before I get ready to put the chassis or the fuel tank onto the chassis. So in this case, this fuel tank kind of just sits in there like this. Whoops, I have that one on backwards. Here we go. Fits in there like this. And then on a regular chassis that still has the skirting, it essentially can snap right back in. Like that. And I don't think I'll have any problems with the modifications I made, going from what the original has to how I've basically modified the fuel tank. That I think the double stick tape and that will hold that on there. I think the extra piping work that comes up, that once the shell is on it, will kind of hold it in place. So those are the modifications right now for the fuel tank. Obviously it will get painted in that at the same time when I paint the car body. So I hope you enjoyed watching just a few of the modifications that I made on the fuel tank. Wasn't a lot to it, but it was enough just to change from the manufactured fuel tank that had the skirting and some of the molded on pipe work to give it just a little more detail and make it look a little more like the prototype of the locomotive that I'm modeling. So just join us in a couple weeks when I will be releasing the DCC decoder installation that'll come out on Saturday, April 11th. And I think that'll also be a good one that hopefully you will enjoy. So thank you again for watching, and hope that you'll tune in next month. Thank you.